The mountain man saw a poor little girl wearing his long-lost necklace, and what he did next would change everything. Snow whirled through the mining town, boots crunching on frozen boards. Then, there she was. A ragged child, shivering in the cold, clutching a silver locket that once belonged to his dead wife. But how did she get it? When he reaches for her, a cruel hand yanks her back. The town sheriff warns him off, and the woman who controls her whispers, "She ain't yours." Still, the girl's eyes tell another story. Was this mountain man staring at the daughter he never knew? Or was it a cruel trick from the past? And when the child is suddenly sold away to strangers on a wagon train, he must ride through snow and storm, risking everything to bring her home. But in a world where the law is against him, and men with power will fight to keep her, will faith and courage be enough to win back his blood before it's too late? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The icy wind whipped around Lucas McCord as he stood rooted in the snow, his weathered hands trembling. Not from the cold. He'd weathered worse in his years in the mountains, but from the sight that had just vanished through that door. The silver locket, catching the last light of day, had struck him like lightning from a clear sky. His boots crunched in the fresh powder as he paced before the building, mind racing back through the years. That locket had been his Sarah's most treasured possession, passed down from her grandmother. The delicate scrollwork around its edges, the tiny rose etched into its face. He'd know it anywhere. The last time he'd seen it was the day they'd laid Sarah to rest, gleaming against the dark wood of her coffin. It had vanished that very night, along with several other precious items, while he'd been lost in grief. Lucas tugged at his beard, trying to make sense of it all. The girl, Bella, couldn't be more than 8 years old. Her eyes, deep brown and cautious, had studied him with an intelligence that reminded him painfully of someone else he'd known, someone who'd left town shortly after Sarah's passing. "Alona," he whispered into the gathering darkness, the Arapaho woman who'd helped care for Sarah in her final days, who'd disappeared without a trace that same night. He'd been too broken then to chase after her, too wrapped in his own pain to wonder why. The harsh woman's voice carried through the walls again, making Lucas wince. "Bella, them dishes won't wash themselves. Stop your dawdling." A quieter voice responded, "Yes, Mrs. Graves." The sound of it twisted something in Lucas's chest. He'd only heard the child speak one word to him, but there was a familiar lilt to her voice, an echo of Alona's gentle way of speaking. Lucas stamped his feet, trying to warm them as he thought. The general store across the street still showed lamplight through its windows. Forcing himself to move, he crossed to it, the bell above the door announcing his entrance with a cheerful jingle that felt at odds with his troubled mind. The shopkeeper, a round-faced man with spectacles, looked up from his ledger. "Evening, stranger. Better hurry if you're shopping. Storm's coming in fierce." "Much obliged," Lucas said, removing his hat. "Actually, I'm hoping you might help me with some information." He approached the counter, noting how the man's friendly expression remained unchanged. Good. That meant he wasn't immediately seen as a threat. "That building across the way, the one with the green shutters. What can you tell me about it?" "Oh, that's Mrs. Graves's boarding house," the shopkeeper said, pushing his spectacles up his nose. "She takes in workers from the mine, mostly. Runs a tight ship, does Mrs. Graves." Lucas nodded slowly. "And the little girl?" "Bella?" Something flickered across the shopkeeper's face. Concern, perhaps? Poor mite. Her mama passed about 3 years back. Mrs. Graves took her in, though took in might be putting too kind a face on it. More like put her to work. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Truth be told, most folks here reckon she's worked too hard for one so young, but ain't nobody's business how another raises their ward." The muscles in Lucas's jaw tightened. "Her mother. Was she called Alona?" The shopkeeper's eyebrows shot up. Why, yes. You knew her? I did, Lucas said carefully. She worked for my wife, years back, in Willow Creek. That fits, the shopkeeper nodded. Alona never said much about her past, but she mentioned Willow Creek once or twice. Worked hard, kept to herself mostly, took sick sudden-like in the winter of '73. Doctor said it was lung fever. He shook his head sadly. Left that poor girl all alone, except for that locket she was so set on Bella keeping. Lucas gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles white. Did Alona ever speak of the child's father? Not that I ever heard tell, the shopkeeper said, though Mrs. Graves has plenty to say on that score, none of it charitable. He studied Lucas's face more closely. You seem mighty interested in this tale, mister. I reckon I am, Lucas said softly. He straightened up, settling his hat back on his head. Much obliged for the information. I'll be staying at the hotel, if it's still where it used to be. Right where you remember it, I expect, though it's under new management these past 5 years. Outside, the snow was falling harder now, thick flakes swirling in the lamplight. Lucas led his horse to the livery stable, his mind churning with calculations. Bella would be 8 now, which meant... His heart thudded heavily in his chest. The timing fit perfectly with those days after Sarah's death, when he'd been drowning his sorrows, and Alona had been the only one who could reach through his grief. He'd woken one morning to find her gone, along with Sarah's locket and a few other valuable pieces. He'd assumed she'd stolen them too, lost in his own pain to question deeper. But now, looking back, he wondered if she'd taken them for a different reason, to provide for something or someone precious. The stable boy took his horse, and Lucas pressed an extra coin into his hand. Make sure he's well rubbed down. It's bitter cold out there. Yes, sir, the boy's eyes brightened at the coin. Want me to give him extra feed too? That'd be right kind of you, Lucas said, managing a small smile despite his troubled thoughts. He gathered his saddlebags and stepped back out into the storm, making his way to the hotel. Each step felt heavy with the weight of revelation, of possibilities he'd never considered. The hotel clerk barely glanced up as he requested a room, just pushed the register across the desk. Lucas signed his name with hands that had steadied somewhat, though his mind was still racing. The room was small but clean, with a window that looked out across the street toward Mrs. Graves's boarding house. Lucas stood at that window for a long time, watching the yellow lamplight in the windows across the way. Somewhere in there, a little girl was washing dishes, wearing his Sarah's locket, and quite possibly carrying his own blood in her veins. The thought made him dizzy with its implications. He pulled out his Bible from his saddlebags, the pages worn soft with use. Sarah had given it to him on their wedding day, her neat handwriting still visible on the flyleaf. With love and faith eternal. He'd turned to it often in the years since her death, finding comfort in its familiar words. Now he sought guidance of a different sort, wondering what path the Lord was laying before him. A memory surfaced, clear as spring water. Alona's voice, soft but urgent, the last time he'd seen her. Some gifts come wrapped in sorrow, Mr. McCord, but they are gifts all the same. Had she been trying to tell him something that day? Had he been too blind with grief to see it? The wind howled outside his window, rattling the panes. Across the street, the lights in the boarding house were going out one by one. Only a single lamp remained lit on the ground floor. The kitchen, he guessed, where a small girl might still be at her chores. Lucas sank into the room's single chair, his body tired but his mind alert. He had much to consider before morning. If what he suspected was true, that child across the street was more than just the bearer of Sarah's stolen locket. She was his daughter, and she'd been living under the harsh rule of Mrs. Graves while he'd been up in his mountain cabin, hiding from his past. Lord, give me wisdom, he whispered into the gathering darkness, and forgive me for being blind for so long. The storm continued to rage outside, but in Lucas's heart, a different kind of storm was brewing, one made of equal parts hope and determination. Whatever came next, he knew his solitary days were numbered. He had a new purpose now, one that would require all the courage and faith he could muster. Morning light crept across the muddy street as Lucas approached the boarding house. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crisp blanket of snow that crunched beneath his boots. He'd waited until after breakfast, hoping the hour might be more favorable for a proper conversation. The boarding house loomed before him, its green shutters hanging slightly crooked against weathered clapboards. A thin spiral of smoke rose from the chimney, and through a window he caught the clatter of dishes being washed. His heart quickened at the thought of Bella working in there, so small against that mountain of chores. Lucas climbed the worn steps and rapped firmly on the door. He'd rehearsed his words carefully, knowing he'd need both truth and tact to navigate this situation. The door creaked open, revealing a tall, angular woman with steel-gray hair pulled back so tightly it made her eyes look sharp and severe. "Yes?" she asked, her tone making it clear visitors weren't welcome. "Ma'am," Lucas removed his hat politely. "I'm Lucas McCord. I need to speak with you about Bella." Mrs. Graves's expression hardened. "That girl's mine to care for. You'll not meddle." She moved to close the door, but Lucas gently placed his hand against it. "Please, Mrs. Graves. This concerns her family. Her true family." "Family?" Mrs. Graves let out a harsh laugh. "That girl's got no family. Her mother died owing me money for room and board. I took her in out of Christian charity when nobody else would." A small movement behind Mrs. Graves caught Lucas's eye. Bella stood in the shadowy hallway, her thin fingers clutching a dish towel. The silver locket gleamed at her throat, catching the morning light. "Bella," Lucas said softly, "would you tell me again about that locket?" Before the girl could speak, Mrs. Graves snapped, "Back to your chores, girl. Those dishes won't wash themselves." But Bella didn't move. Her eyes met Lucas's, wide and hopeful. "Mama said it was special," she whispered. "Said it belonged to my father's wife before she died." "It's nothing but worthless junk," Mrs. Graves cut in. "Probably stolen." "That woman was nothing but—" "That locket," Lucas interrupted firmly, "belonged to my wife Sarah. I gave it to her on our wedding day. It has our initials engraved inside the face, SM and LM. Mrs. Graves's face flushed red. "You're lying. You're just some mountain man trying to cause trouble." She turned toward the street and shouted, "Bobby, run fetch the sheriff!" A young boy playing marbles nearby jumped up and scampered off toward the sheriff's office. "Ma'am," Lucas kept his voice steady, though his hands had curled into fists at his sides. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just want to understand the truth about Bella's heritage." "The truth?" Mrs. Graves sneered. "The truth is she's my ward, legal and proper. I've got the papers to prove it." Heavy boots sounded on the porch, and Sheriff Amos Rudd appeared, his badge catching the morning light. He was a stocky man with a thick mustache and tired eyes that had seen too many disputes. "What seems to be the trouble here, Mrs. Graves?" "This man's trying to interfere with my ward, Sheriff. Claiming all sorts of nonsense about that trinket she wears." The sheriff turned to Lucas, sizing him up. "You got business here, mister?" Lucas met his gaze steadily. "That locket the girl wears belonged to my wife. Her mother worked for us in Willow Creek, years back. The timing—" he paused, choosing his words carefully. "The timing suggests Bella might be my daughter." "Might be?" The sheriff raised an eyebrow. "You got any proof of that? Papers, letters?" "Not yet," Lucas admitted. "But the locket—" "A piece of jewelry ain't proof of kinship," Sheriff Rudd interrupted. "Mrs. Graves here has legal guardianship papers. Unless you can prove otherwise, the girl stays where she is." Behind Mrs. Graves, Bella had crept closer to the door. Her small face was a mixture of hope and fear, and when her eyes met Lucas's, they held a silent plea that pierced his heart. Lucas's hands twitched, every instinct telling him to sweep the child up and ride away from this place. But he'd seen what happened to men who defied the law out here. They ended up dead or in prison, neither of which would help Bella. "I understand," he said finally, his voice rough, "but this isn't finished." "It is for now," the sheriff said firmly. "I suggest you move along, Mr. McCord. And don't be bothering Mrs. Graves or the girl unless you come back with proper proof." Mrs. Graves smiled triumphantly and began to close the door. But before it shut completely, Bella darted forward. "Wait!" she called out softly. "Sir? Did you really know my mama?" "Bella," Mrs. Graves snapped, but not before Lucas could answer. "Yes, child. I knew her. She was a good woman with a kind heart." The door slammed shut, cutting off his view of Bella's face. Lucas stood there for a long moment, his heart heavy in his chest. The sheriff remained on the porch, watching him expectantly. "I meant what I said," Lucas told him quietly. "This isn't finished." "Just keep it legal," the sheriff warned. "That's all I ask." Lucas nodded curtly and turned away, his boots leaving deep prints in the snow as he crossed the street. He could feel eyes watching him from the boarding house windows, but he didn't look back. Later that night, in his rented room above the saloon, Lucas sat in the worn armchair by the window. The room was dim, lit only by a single oil lamp that cast long shadows on the walls. Below, the muffled sounds of the saloon drifted up through the floorboards, piano music, laughter, the clink of glasses. His Bible lay open on his lap, its pages worn smooth by years of handling. Sarah's handwriting on the flyleaf seemed to glow in the lamplight. "With love and faith eternal." He traced the words with his finger, remembering how she'd always said that nothing in life was truly lost, just waiting to be found again in God's own time. "Is that what this is, Lord?" he whispered. "Are you returning what was torn away?" The locket's image burned in his mind, Sarah's precious silver locket, now resting against Bella's thin chest. He remembered the day he'd given it to Sarah, how her eyes had lit up when she saw their initials engraved inside. After her death, he'd been too deep in his grief to question why Alona had taken it. He'd assumed the worst, let anger blind him to other possibilities. But now he wondered if Alona had taken it for a different purpose. Had she known she was carrying his child? Had she meant the locket to be a bridge between past and future, a way for Bella to find her way back to him someday? Lucas closed the Bible carefully and set it on the small table beside him. Outside his window, the moon had risen, casting silver light across the snow-covered street. The boarding house stood dark and silent, but somewhere in there, a little girl slept. A little girl who might be his daughter. He would find the truth, no matter what it took. He would search through documents, track down witnesses, piece together the story that Alona had taken with her to her grave. And somehow, he would find a way to free Bella from Mrs. Graves's harsh care. But it would have to be done right, done legal. The sheriff's warning echoed in his mind. He couldn't help Bella if he ended up in jail, or worse. No, this would take patience and wisdom, two things he'd learned the hard way up in his mountain solitude. Lucas stood and moved to the window, his reflection ghostly in the glass. Tomorrow he would begin his search for proof. Tomorrow he would start unraveling the mystery of Bella's heritage. But tonight, he would pray for guidance and strength for the path ahead. Morning painted the snow-covered streets in brilliant gold. Lucas adjusted his coat against the crisp air as he made his way toward the small Methodist church at the edge of town. The white wooden steeple rose against the clear blue sky, its bell silent in the early hour. He found Reverend Harlan in his study, a cramped room smelling of leather-bound books and wood smoke. The preacher sat at his desk, gray head bent over his morning devotionals. When Lucas knocked softly on the open door, the old man looked up, adjusting his wire-rimmed spectacles. Come in, Reverend Harlan said, his voice gentle but worn with age. "You must be the stranger folks are talking about, the one asking after little Bella." Lucas removed his hat, holding it respectfully. "Yes, sir." "Name's Lucas McCord. I was hoping you might have a moment to talk." "Of course." The Reverend gestured to a worn leather chair across from his desk. "Please, sit." "Would you care for some coffee? It's not very good, I'm afraid, but it's hot." "Much obliged," Lucas said, settling into the chair. The leather creaked beneath him as Reverend Harlan poured coffee into 2 chipped cups. "Now then," the preacher said, handing him a cup. "What's troubling you, Mr. McCord?" Lucas wrapped his weathered hands around the warm cup. "It's about the girl, Bella. She's wearing a silver locket that belonged to my late wife, Sarah." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I gave it to Sarah on our wedding day, had our initials engraved inside. After she passed, it disappeared along with a young woman who worked for us, an Apache woman named Alona." The Reverend's eyes widened slightly at the name. He set his coffee down, forgotten. "Alona," he repeated softly. Yes, I remember her well." Lucas leaned forward, his heart suddenly pounding. "You knew her?" "She came through here, must be 8 or 9 years ago now." Reverend Harlan stood slowly, moving to a shelf lined with leather-bound journals. "I keep records of all who pass through seeking help. Let me see." His fingers traced along the spines until he found the one he wanted. The binding crackled as he opened it, carefully turning yellowed pages. "Ah, here it is." He adjusted his spectacles. It was a cold night, much like yesterday. She arrived after sunset, heavily with child. She asked specifically about you, Mr. McCord. Lucas's coffee cup clattered against its saucer. "She did?" "Indeed." "She wanted to know if you were still alive, if you were well." The Reverend's kind eyes met Lucas's. "I told her you had taken to the mountains after your wife's passing, living as a recluse." She seemed deeply troubled by this news. "What happened then?" Lucas's voice was barely above a whisper. "She stayed only that one night. I offered her shelter here at the church, but she declined. Said she needed to keep moving." He squinted at the page. "I noted here that she wore a silver locket, mentioned it because she kept touching it while we talked, like a talisman." Lucas closed his eyes, pain and regret washing over him. "I drove her away," he said roughly. "After Sarah died, I wasn't myself. When the locket went missing, I accused Alona of theft. She left that very night. I never knew." "That she carried your child?" Reverend Harlan finished gently. "How can you be sure?" The preacher turned another page in his journal. "She told me, Mr. McCord." Not in so many words, but she spoke of wanting her child to know its father someday. And she showed me what was inside the locket. Your initials, clear as day, SM and LM. Lucas set his cup down with trembling hands. "All these years. I never knew. And now Bella. She has Sarah's eyes, Reverend. I saw it yesterday, plain as sunshine, and that locket." "The Lord works in mysterious ways," Reverend Harlan said softly. "Perhaps this is his time for healing old wounds. Mrs. Graves won't give her up easily. The sheriff says I need proof of kinship." The Reverend nodded thoughtfully, then turned to his desk. He carefully tore the relevant pages from his journal, folding them with reverent care. "These are my records from that time. My signature and seal are on each page, and I'm willing to testify to their truth before any judge." He held out the papers. "It may not be enough on its own, but it's a start." Lucas took the pages, handling them like precious gold. "Thank you, Reverend. I don't know how to repay such kindness." "Love that child, Mr. McCord. Love her with all the years you've missed. That will be repayment enough." Lucas tucked the papers safely in his coat pocket and stood, extending his hand. The Reverend's grip was frail but warm. One more thing, Reverend Harlan said. Alona, she had faith in you. Even after everything, she believed you were a good man. Don't prove her wrong. Lucas nodded solemnly. I aim to make things right, Reverend. Whatever it takes. The day passed slowly, Lucas spending hours at the land office and courthouse, searching for any additional records that might help his cause. As evening approached, he found himself drawn back to the boarding house. Through the kitchen window, lamplight spilled onto the snow. Lucas stood in the shadows of a nearby alley, watching as Bella worked at the sink. Her small hands moved mechanically through a stack of dishes, her shoulders slumped with weariness. The silver locket gleamed at her throat, catching the light with each movement. His chest ached at the sight. She was too young for such drudgery, too precious to be treated as a servant. In the lamplight, her features were so clearly a blend of his and Alona's. How had he not seen it instantly? Sarah's eyes, yes, but Alona's delicate cheekbones, his own stubborn chin. You're mine, he whispered into the gathering dark, his breath frosting in the cold air. You're mine, and I'll not let them keep you. The words felt like a sacred vow, witnessed by the stars now appearing in the darkening sky. Tomorrow, he would begin building his case with the Reverend's proof. Tomorrow, he would start the fight to claim what was his by blood and heart. But tonight, he kept vigil in the shadows, watching over his daughter as she worked, protecting her in the only way he could for now. When Mrs. Graves's sharp voice called from inside and Bella hurried away from the window, Lucas remained, his eyes fixed on the space where she had been. The Reverend's words echoed in his mind. Alona had believed in him, even after he'd driven her away. She'd wanted their child to know him someday. Now, standing in the cold, with proof of that truth in his pocket, Lucas silently promised both Alona's memory and his daughter's future that he would not fail them again. The moon cast long shadows across the snow as Lucas crept behind the boarding house. His breath frosted in the cold night air while he balanced a covered pot of steaming venison stew. Earlier, he'd spotted Bella still working in the kitchen well past supper time, her small frame hunched over an endless pile of dishes. The sight had driven him straight back to his camp to fetch the meal he'd prepared. Through the window, lamplight flickered against worn floorboards. Lucas peered inside, making sure Mrs. Graves wasn't around. The house stood quiet, except for the gentle clinking of plates and the soft splash of dishwater. His heart ached watching Bella work so late, her thin shoulders drooping with exhaustion. He tapped gently on the window pane. Bella startled, nearly dropping a plate. Her eyes went wide with recognition, then darted fearfully toward the door. Lucas held up his hands, showing he meant no harm. After a moment's hesitation, she approached the window. "Evening, little one," he whispered, careful to keep his voice low. "Brought you something to eat." Bella glanced again at the door, then back to Lucas. "Mrs. Graves says I'm not to talk to strangers," she whispered back. "That's good advice," Lucas said softly. "But I reckon I'm not exactly a stranger anymore, seeing as how we share something special." He nodded toward the silver locket at her throat. Bella's hand flew to the necklace, clutching it protectively. The gesture reminded him so much of Alona that his chest tightened. "It's all right," he assured her. "I'm not here to take it. Just thought you might be hungry." He lifted the lid of the pot, letting the savory aroma drift through the window. Bella's stomach growled audibly. She bit her lip, wavering between caution and hunger. "Mrs. Graves already went to bed," she admitted finally. "She always takes sleeping powder for her headaches." Lucas nodded encouragingly. "Then maybe you can spare a minute to share some stew with an old mountain man?" After another moment's consideration, Bella reached for the window latch. It opened with a slight creak, and Lucas carefully passed the warm pot through. He watched as she found a bowl in the kitchen cupboard, her movements quiet as a mouse. The lamplight cast a gentle glow across her face as she took her first bite. Her eyes widened in surprise and pleasure. "Good?" Lucas asked. She nodded eagerly. "I haven't had meat in so long," she whispered. "Mrs. Graves says orphans can't be picky about food." Lucas's jaw tightened at her words, but he kept his voice gentle. "Tell me, Bella, do you remember your mother at all?" Bella stirred her stew thoughtfully. "Sometimes I think I do. Like in dreams, almost." She took another bite, then added, "She used to sing to me in words I didn't understand. Apache words, she said they were." Lucas leaned closer to the window, his heart beating faster. "What else do you remember about her?" "She was always moving, always watching over her shoulder like she was scared of something." Bella's small fingers found the locket again. "But at night, when we'd make camp, she'd hold me close and tell me stories about my father." "What kind of stories?" Lucas's voice was barely a whisper now. "She said he lived in the mountains, that he was strong and brave." Bella's eyes grew distant with memory. "She said he had kind eyes, even when he was angry. And that someday, when I was bigger, we'd find him together." Her voice caught slightly. "But then she got sick, and we never did." Lucas gripped the window frame, steadying himself against a wave of emotion. "Your mother's name was Alona," he said softly, "and she had the sweetest laugh I ever heard, like silver bells on a clear morning." Bella stopped eating, her spoon frozen halfway to her mouth. "You knew her?" "I did." Lucas smiled gently. "She worked for me and my wife Sarah many years ago. That locket you're wearing? It was Sarah's wedding gift from me." "Really?" Bella's eyes grew round as she opened the locket, studying the initials inside. "SM and LM. Sarah McCord and Lucas McCord," he confirmed quietly. "McCord," Bella repeated the name slowly, as if tasting it. She looked up at him with new understanding dawning in her eyes. "Then you're—" "I'm the man from your mother's stories," Lucas said softly. "The one who lived in the mountains. The one she wanted to find." Bella set her bowl down with trembling hands. She moved closer to the window, studying his face intently in the lamplight. Lucas held perfectly still, letting her look her fill, watching as she found traces of herself in his features. "She said my father had kind eyes," Bella whispered, "even when he was angry." "Your mother was right about many things," Lucas said. "She was wise that way." Bella reached out hesitantly through the window. Her small fingers touched his weathered cheek, light as a butterfly's wing. "She used to cry sometimes when she thought I was sleeping. She'd hold this locket and whisper, 'We'll find your papa someday.'" Lucas's vision blurred with tears. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there, little one." "If I'd known." "But you're here now," Bella said. Her hand dropped from his face to grasp his larger one where it rested on the window frame. "You found me." "That I did." Lucas squeezed her tiny fingers gently. "And I aim to make things right, if you'll let me." Bella's other hand still clutched the locket. She looked down at it, then back at Lucas. Something shifted in her expression. Fear giving way to hope, loneliness to possibility. "Papa?" she whispered, testing the word carefully. The simple word hit Lucas like a physical blow, filling his chest with an ache sweeter than any he'd known. "Yes, little one," he managed to say past the tightness in his throat. "That's right." A floorboard creaked somewhere in the house above them. Bella quickly withdrew her hand, gathering up the empty bowl and pot. "You'd better go," she whispered urgently. "Mrs. Graves checks on me sometimes." Lucas nodded, reluctantly stepping back from the window. "I'll come again tomorrow night," he promised. "And Bella? Thank you for trusting me." She gave him a small, secret smile as she closed the window. Lucas watched her quickly wash the bowl and return to her dishes, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But just before he turned away, she touched the locket once more and glanced his way, her eyes bright with newfound hope. Lucas made his way back through the snowy night, his cheeks wet with tears he didn't bother to wipe away. His heart felt too big for his chest, swelling with equal measures of joy and purpose. Tomorrow he would continue his legal battle for custody. But tonight he had held his daughter's hand for the first time. She had called him Papa. It was enough to carry him through whatever challenges lay ahead. The pale light of dawn crept over the eastern horizon as Lucas guided his horse along the worn trail to Fort Stanton. Fresh snow crunched beneath the stallion's hooves, and his breath came out in white puffs against the cold morning air. The fort's wooden walls rose before him, stark against the lightening sky. A young sentry called out from his post. "State your business." "Name's Lucas McCord," he answered, reining his horse to a stop. "Here to see Henry Yazzie if he's about." The guard's posture shifted slightly at the mention of the scout's name. "Wait here." He disappeared through the gate, returning moments later with a nod. "Follow me." Lucas dismounted, leading his horse into the fort's courtyard. The familiar sights and sounds of military life surrounded him, the clang of the blacksmith's hammer, the sharp commands from the training grounds, the smell of coffee and wood smoke from the mess hall. Henry Yazzie stood near the stables, adjusting the cinch on his saddle. The years had added a few streaks of gray to his black hair, but his movements were as precise as ever. He looked up as Lucas approached, a flicker of recognition crossing his weathered features. "McCord," Henry said, straightening. "Long time since we shared a trapline." Lucas nodded, extending his hand. "Too long, friend." They clasped hands firmly, the gesture carrying the weight of shared memories, long nights by campfires, tracking through deep snow, watching each other's backs in dangerous country. "What brings you down from your mountain?" Henry asked, leading them to a quiet corner of the stable yard. Lucas leaned against a post, choosing his words carefully. "I'm hoping you might remember someone. A White Mountain Apache woman named Alona. Would have been here at the fort, maybe 8 or 9 years back." Henry's dark eyes sharpened with interest. "I remember her well. Proud woman, strong spirit." He paused, studying Lucas's face. "She asked about you, you know?" Lucas's heart quickened. "Tell me what you remember." Henry gestured to a nearby bench, and they sat. "It was after they moved our people onto the reservation lands. Many widows were pressured to remarry, to combine households. Alona refused. He smiled slightly, said her heart was promised elsewhere. She never told me, Lucas said softly. About the promise, or about... He trailed off, unable to speak the words. About the child she carried? Henry finished gently. No, she wouldn't have. There was much fear then, much distrust between our peoples. She left the reservation before the baby came. He looked directly at Lucas. She carried something of yours, a silver locket. Lucas closed his eyes briefly, remembering. My wife's locket. Sarah's initials were engraved inside. Alona believed it would prove her child's connection to you, Henry continued. She spoke of finding you in the mountains, but the winter was harsh that year. We lost track of her movements. Opening his eyes, Lucas shared what he'd discovered in town. The small girl with Sarah's locket, the unmistakable features that spoke of both her parents' blood, the cruel circumstances that kept her bound to the boarding house. Henry listened intently, his expression growing grave. The child. What is her name? Bella, Lucas answered, his voice rough with emotion. She's 8 years old now, and she has her mother's strength. And her father's eyes, Henry observed quietly. I see the truth of it in your face, old friend. She is yours. Lucas leaned forward, urgent now. I need your help, Henry. The town won't release her to me without proof of kinship. Your testimony about Alona, about the locket, it could make the difference. Henry stood, pacing a few steps as he considered. You understand what claiming her means? She carries two bloodlines, two traditions. There are those who will see that as a burden. I see it as a blessing, Lucas said firmly. I failed Alona by not being there when she needed me. I won't fail her daughter. Bella deserves to know both sides of her heritage, to be proud of all that she is. Henry turned back to him, approval warming his stern features. Then I will speak for you, brother. I will tell what I know of Alona's journey, of her courage, and of the locket that links past to present. Relief and gratitude washed over Lucas. He stood, gripping Henry's shoulder. Thank you. I can't repay such a debt. Raise her well, Henry replied simply. Teach her to walk in both worlds with honor. That will be payment enough. They spoke a while longer, Henry sharing more details about Alona's time at the fort, details Lucas knew would help prove his case to the town authorities. As the sun climbed higher, they made arrangements for Henry to ride into town the following day and give his formal testimony. The morning had grown considerably warmer by the time Lucas mounted up to leave. Henry walked with him to the fort's gate, their boots leaving parallel tracks in the snow. One more thing, Henry said, holding Lucas's horse's bridle. Among my people, we believe children are blessed with the strength of all their ancestors. Your daughter carries not only your blood and Alona's, but the prayers and hopes of generations before her. Lucas nodded, deeply moved by the wisdom in these words. I aim to be worthy of those prayers, he said. Henry released the bridle with a slight smile. You already are, brother. Go with courage. Lucas urged his horse forward, leaving the fort behind. The winter sun had burned away the morning mist, revealing a sky so blue it hurt to look at. As he rode, Lucas found himself doing something he hadn't done in years, praying aloud. Lord, he said softly, his words carried away by the crisp morning air, I know I haven't been the most faithful servant. Spent too many years running from pain instead of facing it. But if you're listening, I sure could use some strength for what's ahead. Not for my sake, but for that little girl's. She deserves a real home, a chance to know who she is and where she comes from. He paused, watching an eagle soar overhead. Help me be the father she needs. Help me make this right. The trail wound down towards the town, where somewhere Bella was starting her day of endless chores. But today was different. Today, Lucas had proof of her heritage, testimony to support his claim. Henry's words had cemented what his heart already knew. Bella was his daughter, a precious bridge between two worlds. With renewed purpose, Lucas pressed on toward town, ready to fight for the family he'd only just discovered, but already loved with all his heart. The morning sun had barely cleared the mountains when Lucas strode into the sheriff's office, his boots leaving wet prints on the wooden floor. Sheriff Rudd looked up from his desk, coffee mug frozen halfway to his lips. The small office smelled of wood smoke and old leather, wanted posters curling at the edges on the wall behind him. Sheriff, Lucas said firmly, we need to talk. Rudd set down his mug with deliberate slowness. Reckon this is about the girl again. Her name is Bella, Lucas corrected, pulling papers from his coat. And I've got proof she's mine. The sheriff's chair creaked as he leaned back, skepticism etched in the lines around his eyes. That so? Mrs. Graves has legal guardianship papers, proper ones, filed with the territory court. Lucas spread his evidence on the desk. Reverend Harlan's leather-bound journal opened to the crucial entry, and a written statement from Henry Yazzie. Read these. Then tell me about proper papers. Rudd's expression remained neutral as he pulled the journal closer. His eyes moved across the page, taking in the Reverend's careful script. April 15th, 1875. Young Apache woman arrived today, heavy with child. Sought Lucas McCord by name. Carried silver locket with initials SM. When told of his retreat to mountains after Sarah's passing, her hope seemed to dim. Left before I could offer further aid. God guide her path. The sheriff's fingertips drummed against his desk. Harlan's word carries weight, he admitted. Man's been here longer than most, keeps honest records. He picked up Henry's statement next, brow furrowing as he read. Henry Yazzie, Lucas explained. Army scout at Fort Stanton. Known him 15 years. He knew Bella's mother, Alona. Witnessed her carrying that same locket, heard her speak of me. The locket being the one the girl wears now? Lucas nodded. My late wife's. Sarah's initials inside, just like the Reverend wrote. Alona must have found it after. He paused, old pain flickering across his features. After Sarah died. Kept it all these years to prove Bella's connection to me. Rudd set the papers down, studying Lucas with shrewd eyes. Legal proof of parentage requires more than a necklace and some memories, McCord. Then what about this? Lucas pulled out one final document, a carefully preserved letter in feminine handwriting. Found it in my cabin before riding to town. Must have missed it years back. It's from Alona, telling me about the baby. Never saw it because I was too deep in my grief, too far in the mountains. His voice roughened. I failed them both then. I aim to make it right now. The sheriff read the letter slowly, then laid it alongside the other evidence. Morning light streamed through the office window, dust motes dancing in the golden bars. Finally, he sighed. Might be enough for a judge, he conceded, though his tone remained cautious. But McCord, you need to understand something. This town, he gestured vaguely toward the window. Folk here ain't exactly welcoming to the idea of mixing bloodlines. Some still remember the raids, hold grudges deeper than sense. Lucas's hands clenched at his sides. Bella's my daughter, he said, voice low and intense. Don't care what anyone thinks about her mother's people or mine. She deserves a real home, real family. Easy now, Rudd raised his hands. I'm not arguing against you. Just warning you what you're up against. He gathered the papers, tapping them into a neat stack. I'll write up a report, send these documents to the territorial judge. Might take a few weeks to get a ruling. Weeks? Lucas protested. While she stays with that woman who treats her like a servant? Law's the law, Rudd said firmly. But, he hesitated, then added more quietly. Nothing says you can't visit her, long as Mrs. Graves allows it. Maybe ease the transition, if the judge rules in your favor. Lucas recognized the subtle permission in the sheriff's words. Not official support, but not opposition either. He nodded slowly. Much obliged, Sheriff. Don't thank me yet, Rudd warned. Still got a hard road ahead. But, he glanced at the evidence again. Can't deny you've made a solid case. Lucas left the sheriff's office with hope burning bright in his chest, despite the warnings about town prejudice. The morning had warmed considerably, snow melting in dirty rivulets along the boardwalk. He spent the day making arrangements, ordering supplies to be delivered to his cabin, speaking quietly with sympathetic townspeople who might support his cause. As evening approached, he made his way to the boarding house. The kitchen window glowed with lamplight, and he could see Bella inside, working at the sink. He approached carefully, making sure Mrs. Graves wasn't around. Bella, he whispered. She turned, face lighting up when she saw him. Moving quietly, she came to the window. Papa, she whispered back, the word sending warmth through his entire being. Got some news, little one, he said softly. Talked to the sheriff today. Showed him proof that you're my girl. Might take some time, but soon you'll be coming to live with me. Would you like that? Bella's eyes widened, hope and uncertainty dancing across her features. Really? But, she glanced over her shoulder nervously, Mrs. Graves says I have to stay here. Says I owe her for taking me in." "You don't owe her anything," Lucas said firmly but gently. "You're my daughter, and your place is with me." A small smile tugged at Bella's lips. "I'll help with chores," she offered earnestly. "I can cook some, and clean, and—" "Hush now," Lucas interrupted softly. "You'll help because you want to, not because you have to. We'll be family, proper, and true." Bella's smile grew, showing a missing tooth. "Will you teach me to ride? And tell me about my mama?" "All that and more," Lucas promised. "Got a fine, gentle mare that'll be perfect for learning. And I'll tell you everything I remember about your mama, how brave she was, how kind." A noise from inside made Bella jump. "I have to go," she whispered. "Mrs. Graves gets angry if the dishes aren't done." "Soon," Lucas assured her. "Soon you won't have to worry about her anger anymore. Just hold on to that locket and remember, you're a McCord, and McCords keep their promises." He watched her return to her work, his heart simultaneously light with hope and heavy with the weight ahead. In his mind's eye, he could already see his cabin transformed, the spare room cleaned and brightened for Bella, the kitchen warm with cooking smells, the sound of a child's laughter echoing off the mountain walls. As he walked back to the hotel, Lucas's thoughts drifted to Alona, wondering if she could see their daughter now, could know that her long-ago journey through the snow hadn't been in vain. The locket had done its work, bridging past and present, leading Bella home at last. The stars were emerging in the darkening sky, bright and clear in the mountain air. Lucas paused to look up at them, remembering how both Sarah and Alona had loved stargazing. Now their daughter would learn the constellations too, would hear the stories of both her bloodlines written in the ancient lights above. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, prejudices to face, legal hurdles to clear, a little girl's trust to keep building. But tonight, hope glowed as bright as the kitchen lamp that had illuminated his daughter's smile. Soon, they would be family, not just in their hearts, but in the eyes of the law and God above. The morning sun painted golden streaks across Lucas McCord's cabin floor as he stood in the doorway, seeing his home through new eyes. Dust motes danced in the light, revealing years of bachelor living. The thought of Bella stepping into this space made him straighten his shoulders with fresh purpose. "Time to make this a proper home," he muttered, rolling up his sleeves. Lucas started with the spare room he'd used for storage. He carried out boxes of old traps and trading goods, stacking them neatly in the lean-to outside. The small window, clouded with grime, took nearly an hour to clean. When finished, sunshine poured through the clear glass, revealing a chamber ready for transformation. He dragged the feather mattress outside, beating clouds of dust from it with a willow switch. The sharp thwacks echoed off the mountainside, startling a pair of blue jays from their perch. The fresh mountain air would do the mattress good, and the quilts, too. He spread them carefully over the porch rail, their faded patterns still bright enough to catch the eye. Inside, Lucas attacked the floors with soap, water, and determination. On his knees with a scrub brush, he worked the rough-hewn planks until the pine grain showed clean and bright. The scent of lye soap mixed with the ever-present smell of wood smoke, creating an oddly comforting aroma. As he worked, memories of Alona rose unbidden. He remembered her laugh, bright as spring water, when he'd tried to teach her to pan for gold. Her quiet strength as she spoke of her people's struggles, never bitter, always hoping for better days. Most of all, he remembered her eyes, dark, deep, and filled with a love that had scared him then, fresh from losing Sarah. "Should have been braver," he murmured, wringing out his cloth in the bucket. "Should have trusted what was growing between us." The afternoon light shifted as Lucas moved to his workbench. He selected a piece of pine he'd been saving, straight-grained and free of knots. With careful measurements and sure strokes of his draw knife, he began shaping a small chair sized for a child. The wood curls fell at his feet as the piece took shape beneath his hands. Alona would have loved watching this, he said softly to himself. She always said creating with hands was a form of prayer. The chair legs emerged first, then the seat, carefully smoothed to prevent splinters. Lucas took extra care with the back, adding gentle curves that would cradle a small frame comfortably. As he worked, he pictured Bella sitting there, perhaps reading or drawing, safe and warm in her father's home at last. In between tasks, Lucas brought in fresh straw for the mattress, remembering how Alona had taught him to weave sweetgrass into the bedding for pleasant dreams. He'd traded for new blankets in town, soft wool dyed in cheerful reds and blues. These he folded carefully at the foot of the bed, ready for chilly mountain nights. A shelf emerged from more saved lumber, its edges sanded smooth. Lucas arranged his few books there, a Bible, some dime novels, a primer he'd bought in town. Room enough for more, he thought. Every child should have stories. As evening approached, Lucas built up the fire and settled into his chair, muscles aching pleasantly from the day's work. The flames cast dancing shadows on the newly cleaned walls. The small chair sat in its place of honor, waiting for its occupant. Lucas could almost see Bella there, curled on the bearskin rug, perhaps reading one of those books by firelight. "You'd be proud, Alona," he whispered to the quiet cabin. "She has your spirit in her eyes." He remembered Alona's determination, how she'd refused to let their brief love die even when he'd withdrawn into grief. She'd carried their child alone rather than take an arranged marriage, had traveled hundreds of miles to find him. The silver locket had been her way of building a bridge between past and future, between two cultures, between father and daughter. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Lucas pulled out his own Bible, its pages worn soft with use. Inside the cover, Sarah's neat hand recorded their wedding date. Below it, in newer ink, he'd added Bella's name and what he knew of her birth date, a family record spanning love and loss and love again. Miles away in town, unknown to Lucas, Bella knelt beside her narrow bed in the boarding house attic. The silver locket lay cool against her skin as she whispered her nightly prayers. Mrs. Graves's harsh voice carried up from below, but Bella barely heard it now. Her thoughts were focused on the promise of tomorrow, on the father who looked at her with such gentle eyes. "Please, God," she murmured, fingers clasping the locket. "Please let Mr. McCord, let Papa, keep his promise. Let me go home with him soon." The parallel prayers, father and daughter separated by miles but united in hope, rose into the star-filled night. In his cabin, Lucas added more wood to the fire, its warmth a promise of the family hearth to come. In her attic room, Bella drifted to sleep, dreaming of mountain peaks and a father's welcoming arms. Lucas's final task before bed was to hang a small mirror in Bella's room, angled to catch the morning light. He remembered how Alona would greet the sun each day, teaching him that each dawn was a gift to be treasured. Soon, God willing, their daughter would see her first mountain sunrise reflected in that glass, would know at last what it meant to be truly home. "Almost ready, little one," Lucas whispered to the waiting room. "Almost ready for you to come home." The cabin settled around him, no longer just shelter but a sanctuary in the making, transformed by love and hope into something new, a father's heart built in wood and stone, waiting for his daughter's return. The first hints of dawn had barely touched the mountain peaks when Lucas McCord woke in his cabin. He'd barely slept, too eager to bring Bella home at last. The small chair he'd crafted caught the pale light, and his heart swelled thinking how soon it would cradle his daughter. Lucas moved with purpose, checking his saddlebags one final time. He'd packed them the night before with care, a warm blanket, some dried apple slices, and a small rag doll he'd traded for in town. Everything a girl might need for the ride to her new home. "Today's the day, Lord," he whispered, running his hand over the smooth pine of Bella's chair. "Today we make things right. The morning air bit sharp and clean as Lucas mounted his horse. Frost crunched under the gelding's hooves as they picked their way down the mountain trail. Lucas urged his mount to a steady trot once they reached better ground, his mind already in town, already seeing Bella's smile. But something felt wrong the moment he entered the town's outskirts. People clustered in small groups, speaking in low voices that died away when he passed. Lucas's spine stiffened. He pressed his horse faster toward the boarding house. The sound hit him first. Shouting, crying, chaos spilling from the usually quiet building. Lucas's heart clenched as he dismounted, taking the porch steps 2 at a time. Inside, several of the younger boarders huddled near the stairs, faces tear-streaked. "Where is she?" Lucas demanded, his voice rough with sudden fear. "Where's Bella?" Mrs. Graves appeared from her office, her face set in lines of false concern. "Why, Mr. McCord?" "You're too late, I'm afraid. The girl's gone." "Gone?" The word felt like ice in Lucas's throat. "Gone where?" "I had an excellent opportunity arise." Mrs. Graves smoothed her apron with practiced calm. "The railroad's always looking for strong young workers. Their foreman offered a fair price for her contract." Lucas's vision went red at the edges. "You sold her?" His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "She's my daughter." "You've shown no proof of that." Mrs. Graves's voice turned sharp. "I had every legal right to arrange suitable employment for my ward." The wagon left at first light, heading north to the new rail line. Lucas spun away from her, bile rising in his throat. First light. Hours ago now. The wagon could be miles ahead already. He burst out of the boarding house, mounting his horse in one fluid motion. The sheriff's office was just down the street. He found Sheriff Rudd at his desk, looking uncomfortable before Lucas even spoke. "You have to stop them," Lucas growled. "She sold my girl to the railroad?" "Now, Lucas," the sheriff began, spreading his hands. "Mrs. Graves holds legal guardianship, without court papers proving otherwise." "She's 8 years old," Lucas slammed his palm on the desk. "They'll work her to death on those lines." "I understand you're upset." The sheriff wouldn't meet his eyes. "But my hands are tied. The contract's legal enough." "Legal," Lucas's voice cracked. Was it legal when they took her people's land? Was it legal when they drove her mother away? Some things matter more than paper law, Sheriff. Maybe so. Sheriff Rudd sighed heavily. "But I can't help you, Lucas. That wagon's long gone." Lucas stood there, trembling with rage and grief. The small rag doll in his saddlebag seemed to burn against his leg, a gift that would never be given. Without another word, he stormed out of the office. He rode hard for his cabin, pushing his horse past wisdom, needing the sanctuary of his mountain. The sun climbed higher, mocking him with its cheerful light. When he finally reached home, Lucas nearly fell from the saddle. Inside, the cabin felt like a tomb. The small chair sat empty, accusing. The fresh quilts lay folded, waiting for a child who would never warm them. Lucas collapsed in front of the cold hearth, his legs giving way at last. "Lord," he whispered, his voice raw. "Lord, please!" His fingers found the worn pages of his Bible, clutching them like a lifeline. "Don't take her from me again. Not when I've just found her." Tears he'd held back in town flowed freely now. He thought of Bella's thin shoulders, her quiet strength so like her mother's. He imagined her frightened face as the wagon rattled north, every mile taking her further from home, from hope, from the father she'd just begun to trust. "I failed them both," he choked out. "First Alona, now Bella?" His prayers turned desperate, spilling through clenched teeth. "Lord, show me the way. Show me how to make this right." The cabin offered no answer. Outside, a jay called harshly, and somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoed off the mountains. Lucas's head snapped up at the sound, his tears suddenly still. The railroad. They'd taken his girl to the railroad, and every rail line had an end, had a destination, had limits that even a desperate father might overcome. Lucas remained on his knees, but his prayers changed. No longer pleading, but preparing. No longer lost, but looking ahead. His girl was out there, and she wore her mother's locket, wore the proof of their connection close to her heart. "I'm coming, little one," he whispered. "Papa's coming." The empty chair stood witness as Lucas McCord began to plan. He had failed to protect Bella's mother years ago, had let fear and grief drive him into solitude. But he would not fail their daughter, not while breath remained in his body, not while God granted him strength to follow. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, touching the fresh-swept floors where Bella should have played. Lucas remained by the cold hearth, his Bible open on his knee, his prayers a constant stream as he plotted his next move. The law had failed them. The town had failed them. But a father's love, that was a force beyond paper and contracts, beyond man's law into God's own territory. Every minute that passed was another mile between them. Lucas felt each one like a physical blow. But he forced himself to think clearly, to plan carefully. Rushing blindly after the wagon would only end in failure. He needed to be smarter this time, needed to be worthy of the trust he'd seen growing in Bella's eyes. The cabin grew darker as the sun set behind the mountains. Lucas still knelt by the hearth, his prayers never ceasing. "Lord, don't take her from me again," he whispered one final time. "Guide my path. Show me the way to bring her home." Outside, another train whistle echoed through the gathering dusk. This time, Lucas heard it not as a taunt, but as a signal. A reminder that every journey had its end. Every trail could be followed. Every child of God could find their way home, if someone cared enough to show them the way. Snow began falling outside Lucas McCord's cabin window, thick flakes drifting past like ash from a dying fire. Inside, the mountain man slumped at his rough-hewn table, shoulders bowed under the weight of loss. His calloused fingers traced the worn leather binding of his Bible, then shifted to brush against the small wooden chair he'd carved for Bella. The piece stood barely knee-high, its surface smooth from hours of careful work. Each touch felt like another twist of the knife in his heart. The empty chair mocked him. He'd spent days getting it just right, working the wood until it would fit a child perfectly. Now it would stay empty, gathering dust like his dreams of having Bella home. Lucas's throat tightened as he remembered her thin face peering through the boarding house window, trust beginning to bloom in her eyes when she'd whispered, "Papa." A knock at the door startled him from his dark thoughts. Lucas didn't move to answer it. The wind whistled through the cabin's chinks, carrying snowflakes that melted on the floor. The knock came again, more insistent. "Lucas," Reverend Harlan's voice carried through the wood. "I know you're in there, son." Lucas closed his eyes, wrestling with the urge to remain silent. But something in the old preacher's tone, concern, maybe, or simple human kindness, made him push to his feet. He opened the door to find Reverend Harlan on his porch, snow dusting his gray hair, a covered basket in his arms. "Thought you might need some sustenance," the preacher said, holding up the basket. "Both for body and soul." Lucas stepped back wordlessly, letting the older man enter. The Reverend set his burden on the table, brushing snow from his coat. His eyes fell on the small chair, understanding softening his weathered face. "Martha sent bread," he said, unwrapping the basket, "and there's some of her beef stew here. Still warm, if you've a mind to eat." Lucas shook his head. "Much obliged, Reverend, but I ain't hungry." "Wasn't really asking." Harlan began setting out the food with quiet determination. The rich smell of the stew filled the cabin, making Lucas's empty stomach betray him with a growl. "Sit down, Lucas." The Lord knows we think clearer with food in our bellies. Almost against his will, Lucas found himself sinking back into his chair. The preacher served him a bowl of stew and broke off a chunk of fresh bread, then settled across the table with his own portion. For several minutes, they ate in silence while the snow fell harder outside. "I failed her," Lucas finally said, his voice rough. "Failed them both. Alona came looking for me years ago, and I wasn't there. Now I've lost Bella too." His hands trembled as he set down his spoon. "Maybe it's God's judgment on me for turning my back on the world after Sarah died." Reverend Harlan's kind eyes held no condemnation. "The Lord doesn't work that way, son. He didn't show you that necklace just to mock you." Lucas's weathered face crumpled, tears tracking down his cheeks. "Then why? Why let me find her just to lose her again?" His fist clenched on the table. "I can't bear it, Reverend. Can't bear knowing she's out there somewhere, scared and alone, thinking I abandoned her like everyone else." "The Lord hasn't abandoned her," Harlan said firmly, "and he hasn't abandoned you either." He reached across the table, laying his hand on Lucas's arm. "Sometimes God breaks us so we'll lean on him. So we'll remember where our true strength comes from." Lucas's shoulders shook as he fought for control. The preacher's words pierced through his despair, touching something deeper, something that had been there all along, waiting to be awakened. "I keep thinking about that locket," he whispered, "about how it found its way back after all these years. About how that little girl survived everything life threw at her, just like her mama did." His fingers found the Bible again, gripping it like an anchor. "It can't be coincidence, can it? The Lord must have had a purpose in it all." "He always does," Harlan agreed softly, "though we don't always see it clear at first." He studied Lucas's face. "What does your heart tell you that purpose might be?" Lucas was quiet for a long moment, his thumb running over the Bible's worn pages. Outside, the wind sang through the pines, carrying the sound of distant coyotes. When he spoke again, his voice was steadier. "Tells me I need to find her," he said, "to make things right the way I couldn't for Alona." His grip on the Bible tightened. "But I'm afraid, Reverend. Afraid I ain't strong enough. Afraid I'll fail again." "Then it's good you won't be doing it alone." Harlan's eyes crinkled at the corners. "You've got the Lord's strength to lean on now. And mine too, for what that's worth." Something stirred in Lucas's chest. Not hope exactly, not yet, but perhaps its first faint spark. He looked at the small chair he'd carved, seeing it not as a symbol of loss now, but as a promise waiting to be kept. "I don't know where to start," he admitted. "That wagon's got hours of lead on me, and winter's coming hard." "Then we start with prayer," Harlan said simply. "And then we start asking questions." Someone in town must know which railroad camp they were headed for. He patted the Bible under Lucas's hand. "The good book says all things work together for good for those who love God. Maybe this is his way of getting you back into the world, where you can do his work." Lucas drew a shuddering breath, wiping roughly at his tears with his sleeve. "You really believe that? That there's still hope?" "I believe," Harlan said firmly, "that the Lord doesn't give us burdens without also giving us the strength to bear them. And I believe he put that necklace around that child's neck for a reason." He squeezed Lucas's arm. "The question is, do you believe it too?" Lucas closed his eyes, letting the preacher's words sink deep. He thought of Bella's face in the lamplight, of the trust he'd seen growing there. Thought of Alona's courage in seeking him out all those years ago. Thought of the silver locket that had brought their stories full circle. When he opened his eyes again, determination had replaced despair. His fingers found the Bible with new purpose, no longer clutching it in anguish, but holding it as a source of strength. "Yes," he said quietly. "Yes, I reckon I do believe it." He straightened in his chair, shoulders squaring. "And I aim to prove worthy of that belief." Reverend Harlan smiled, satisfaction warming his tired face. "That's the spirit, son. Now finish that stew before it gets cold. You'll need your strength for what's ahead." The snow continued falling outside Lucas McCord's cabin, but inside, something had changed. Hope had taken root again, small but stubborn as a spring flower pushing through winter soil. Lucas ate the rest of his meal in silence. But his mind was already working, planning, drawing strength from the presence of both his earthly and heavenly fathers. The small chair still stood empty, but now it seemed to speak not of loss, but of promise, of a future that could yet be reclaimed if a man had faith enough to try. The first rays of dawn painted the snow-covered mountains in shades of rose and gold as Lucas McCord tightened the last strap on his saddle. His breath frosted in the bitter morning air while he methodically checked his provisions: dried beef, hardtack, coffee, extra blankets, and his worn Bible carefully wrapped against the damp. "You plan to track that wagon alone?" The quiet voice startled him. Henry Yazzie emerged from the shadows of the stable, already mounted on his paint horse. The Apache scout sat easy in his saddle, a Winchester rifle across his lap and supplies tied behind him. Lucas paused, one hand on his horse's flank. "Henry, didn't expect to see you here." "The child is of my people," Henry said simply. His dark eyes held Lucas's steadily. "And I knew her mother." Something passed between the two men then, understanding, perhaps, or shared purpose. Lucas nodded slowly, accepting both the offer and its deeper meaning. "Much obliged," he said quietly. They rode out as the sun cleared the eastern peaks, following the wagon tracks north. The trail was clear enough at first, wheel ruts carved deep in the frozen ground. Their horses' hooves crunched through crystal-crusted snow, breaths steaming in the winter air. Henry rode slightly ahead, his keen eyes reading signs Lucas might have missed. A broken branch here, a scuffed rock there. The scout moved with the easy grace of one born to the saddle, while Lucas's own seat showed the slightly stiffer posture of a man more used to walking mountain trails alone. "Wagon's moving slow," Henry observed, as they paused to water the horses at a half-frozen creek. "Heavy load, poor roads. We make good time, maybe catch them in 3 days." Lucas nodded, scanning the northern horizon where dark clouds threatened more snow. "If the weather holds." He pulled his coat tighter against the wind. "Bella ain't used to such cold. Hope they're keeping her warm at least." Henry's expression softened slightly. "She is strong, like her mother." He remounted, adjusting his rifle. "Alona survived worse times than this." They pushed on until dusk forced them to make camp in a sheltered draw. Lucas built a small fire while Henry tended the horses, each man moving with the efficient rhythm of long practice in the wilderness. The flames cast dancing shadows on the snow-laden pines around them as they shared a simple meal of coffee and trail bread. "Tell me about her," Lucas said finally, staring into the fire. "About Alona." "I knew her such a short time, really." Henry was quiet for a long moment, warming his hands around his tin cup. "She was respected among our people," he said at last. "Strong-willed, but kind. When the soldiers moved us onto the reservation, she helped many adjust to the new ways without losing the old ones." He glanced at Lucas. "She spoke of you sometimes, when we would meet on my scouting routes. Said you were a good man, even if you didn't know it yourself." Lucas's throat tightened. He looked away, blinking hard. "I wasn't there when she needed me." "No," Henry agreed quietly. "But you are here now, for her daughter. That would matter to her more." The fire crackled between them, sending sparks dancing up toward the star-filled sky. Lucas pulled out his Bible, its leather cover smooth with years of handling. "Mind if I pray some?" he asked. Henry shook his head. "The Creator hears all voices that speak true." Lucas bowed his head, his rough voice carrying quiet but clear in the winter night. "Lord, watch over that little girl wherever she is tonight. Keep her safe and warm, help her know she ain't alone, and guide our path to her if it be your will." He paused, then added, And thank you for sending good companions when they're most needed." Henry nodded approval, adding a few soft words in Apache that Lucas didn't understand but recognized as a blessing. The night deepened around them, bitter cold seeping in despite the fire. They took turns keeping watch, though both men slept lightly, alert to any change in the wilderness sounds around them. Dawn brought fresh snow and harder going. The horses labored through drifts that sometimes reached their bellies, steam rising from their flanks despite the cold. Henry led them on detours around the worst spots, reading the land with an instinct born of long experience. They spoke little as they rode, saving their breath for the climb, but the silence between them was comfortable now. When they stopped to rest the horses, Henry showed Lucas how to wrap his feet in rabbit fur the Apache way, keeping his toes from freezing in his boots. Lucas shared his store of pemmican, made from his last summer's hunting. That evening, as they huddled near another small fire, Henry spoke of Alona again. "She taught the children our stories," he said, his voice holding warmth at the memory. "Said they needed to know where they came from, even in changing times." He looked at Lucas. "She would have taught Bella too, I think, if she had lived." Lucas nodded slowly. "Reckon I'll need some teaching myself then," he said. "Want to do right by both of them." Henry's approval showed in his slight smile. "There is time for that. First, we find the child." They slept that night wrapped in their blankets, snow falling soft around them. Lucas dreamed of Bella sitting by his cabin fire, singing one of her mother's songs. He woke with tears frozen on his cheeks, but hope burning stronger in his heart. The third day brought clearing skies, but deeper cold. The wagon tracks remained visible, but barely. Fresh snow had nearly filled them in. Henry studied them carefully at each rise, confirming they still followed the right trail. "They stay to the main road," he noted. "Good for us. Bad weather would force them to shelter soon." Lucas pulled his scarf tighter against the wind. "Praying we find them before that happens." He patted his horse's neck encouragingly as they started down another slope. "Hold on, Bella," he whispered. "We're coming." The sun was setting behind them, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of purple and gold, when Henry raised his hand for silence. He pointed to a distant smudge of smoke rising against the darkening sky. "Camp ahead," he said quietly. "Big one. Might be the railroad crew." Lucas felt his heart leap, though he kept his voice steady. "How far?" 3, maybe 4 hours' ride." Henry studied the terrain thoughtfully. "But we should wait for morning. Too easy to lose the trail in dark." Lucas wanted to argue to push on through the night, but he knew the scout was right. They made camp in a grove of pines, eating cold rations to avoid making a fire that might be seen. Lucas held his Bible but didn't read it, just drew comfort from its familiar presence in his hands. "Get some rest," Henry advised, settling back against his saddle. "Tomorrow we'll need clear heads." Lucas nodded, though sleep seemed impossible with their goal so close. He looked up through the pine boughs at the stars scattered like diamond dust across the black sky. Somewhere ahead, under those same stars, his daughter was waiting. He prayed she could feel his presence drawing nearer, carrying the promise of home and family with every mile. The night wind sang through the pines, carrying the distant howl of wolves. But Lucas McCord felt no fear, only rising determination. Faith and friendship had brought them this far through the winter wilderness. Tomorrow would test them both, but tonight hope burned bright as the North Star above them, guiding their way forward. Henry's quiet voice came through the darkness. "She will know you when she sees you." The heart remembers what the eyes forgot. Lucas clutched his Bible tighter, holding on to that promise as the long night slowly passed. The morning sun cast long shadows across the snow-laden passes as Lucas and Henry pressed northward. Their breath frosted in the bitter air, horses struggling through drifts that sometimes reached their flanks. Lucas's fingers, though wrapped in wool, had gone numb hours ago. Still, he urged his mount forward, each step bringing him closer to Bella. Near midday, they encountered a farm wagon headed south. The driver, an older man with a snow-crusted beard, pulled his team to a halt when Henry raised his hand in greeting. His wife huddled beside him, wrapped in layers of quilts. "Hoping you might help us," Lucas said, riding closer. "Looking for a railroad wagon, probably carrying children." The farmer nodded slowly. "Passed them 2 days back. Weren't right, seeing little ones packed in there like cargo." He gestured north with his chin. "They're headed for the mining camps up Dakota way. Railroad's always hungry for small hands to work the narrow shafts." Lucas's jaw tightened. He fought to keep his voice steady. "How many children?" 6, maybe 7, including one little Indian girl. The farmer's wife spoke up, her face pinched with concern. "Poor thing looked half frozen. I tried to give her my spare shawl, but that foreman wouldn't allow it." "That's my daughter," Lucas said, his voice rough. "They took her without right." The farmer's expression darkened. "Ain't surprised. Railroad folk act like they own everything these days, including people." He pointed to a distant pass between snow-covered peaks. "They took the high trail there. Dangerous going with a wagon, but it's the quickest route north." Lucas touched his hat brim. "Much obliged for the news." "God go with you," the farmer's wife called as they rode on. "That child needs her father." They made better time that afternoon, following the wagon's clear tracks through the pass. The trail narrowed dangerously, dropping away on one side into a deep ravine. Fresh snow had drifted in places, concealing treacherous ice beneath. "Wagon passed here recent," Henry observed, studying marks in the snow. 2 days, maybe less. They travel slow with children." Lucas nodded, hope stirring in his chest. Might catch them soon then. But the winter wilderness had other plans. That evening, they faced a half-frozen river, its surface a treacherous mix of ice and open water. They lost precious hours finding a safe crossing, the horses trembling with cold as they picked their way across. Food grew scarce as they pushed higher into the mountains. They shared the last of the pemmican, then resorted to brewing pine needle tea for sustenance. The nights were worst, bitter cold that seemed to freeze a man's very thoughts. Lucas took to reading his Bible by moonlight, finding comfort in familiar verses about faith rewarded and children restored to their families. 4 days into their pursuit, they huddled around a small fire in the lee of a granite boulder. Henry had managed to snare a rabbit, and the smell of cooking meat made Lucas's stomach growl. He couldn't help wondering if Bella was getting enough to eat. "Tell me," Henry said suddenly, breaking their usual evening silence. "If Bella calls you father, will you honor her mother's people too?" Lucas looked up, meeting the scout's steady gaze across the flames. It was a fair question, and one he'd been pondering himself during the long hours in the saddle. "I aim to," he said slowly. "Truth is, I loved Alona. Never stopped, really. And Bella's got her blood, her heritage." He picked up a stick, stirring the fire. "I reckon being a father means more than just providing food and shelter. It means honoring where a child comes from, all parts of them." Henry nodded, but pressed further. "Our ways are different from yours. Our stories, our beliefs, our understanding of the land. Will you let her learn these things?" "I will." Lucas's voice carried the weight of a vow. "I'll need help, mind you. Can't teach what I don't know myself, but I want her to be proud of who she is, all of who she is." He met Henry's eyes again. "Would you help with that? Help me teach her about her mother's people?" A hint of a smile crossed Henry's weathered face. "It would honor Alona's memory." He raised his tin cup. "To the child of 2 worlds." Lucas raised his own cup, the gesture carrying the solemnity of a sacred promise. to Bella. They rode out at first light, the horses' hooves breaking through crusty snow. The wagon tracks were clearer now and fresher, but the weather was turning again. Dark clouds massed on the horizon, promising more snow. "Need to catch them before the storm," Henry said, studying the sky. "Fresh snow will hide the trail." Lucas urged his horse faster, though the animal was already tired. Every sunrise that found them still pursuing meant another day Bella spent in the hands of men who saw her only as property to be used. The thought drove him like a spur in his own side. They crossed a high meadow where the wind had scoured the ground nearly bare. Henry dismounted suddenly, kneeling to examine something in the snow. He held up a small piece of cloth, part of a child's shawl, frozen stiff. "Bella's?" Lucas asked, his heart clenching. Henry nodded. "Thread pattern is a patchywork. She dropped this less than a day ago." Lucas took the scrap of fabric, tucking it carefully inside his coat. "We're gaining on them." They pushed on through the afternoon, stopping only briefly to rest the horses. The coming storm pressed close, the air growing heavy and still. Lucas found himself praying under his breath as they rode, asking for strength, for guidance, for one more day of clear trail before the snow came. That evening, as they made camp in a sheltered hollow, Henry shared more stories of Alona. How she had taught the younger children traditional songs, how she had known the healing properties of plants, how she had kept faith with the old ways, even while adapting to new ones. "She would have taught Bella these things," Henry said. "Now that task may fall to others." Lucas nodded, understanding the responsibility he was taking on. It wasn't just about claiming a daughter. It was about preserving a heritage, honoring a culture that had survived against all odds. He thought about the cabin he'd prepared, seeing now how it would need to change, to grow, to make room for more than just his own ways. "I promise you," he said quietly, "Bella will know her mother's people. Their strength will be her strength. Their stories will be her stories." He pulled out his Bible, worn smooth by years of handling. "Just as she'll know my faith, she'll know theirs. There's room in a father's heart for both." Henry reached over and gripped Lucas's shoulder, a gesture that spoke louder than words. They sat together as darkness fell, the storm clouds blocking out the stars, each man lost in thoughts of the child they pursued, and the future they would help shape for her. The wind rose in the night, carrying the first flakes of snow. Lucas lay awake, listening to its mournful song through the trees, his heart both heavy and hopeful. Tomorrow would bring them closer to Bella, but it would also mark the beginning of a greater journey, one that would require him to open his heart to new ways, new understandings, new definitions of family. He touched the scrap of shawl through his coat, its presence a reminder of both what had been lost and what could be regained. In the darkness, he whispered a prayer, not just for Bella's safety now, but for wisdom to be the father she would need, bridging two worlds with love and understanding. The 5th day of their pursuit drew to a close, painting the mountain sky in deep purples and fading gold. Lucas and Henry guided their tired horses up a steep ridge, the animals' breath coming in white puffs in the cold evening air. The wind had died down, leaving an eerie stillness broken only by the crunch of hooves on snow. At the crest, Lucas pulled his mount to a sudden halt. Below them, in a sheltered valley, 3 railroad wagons had made camp for the night. Thin streams of smoke rose from cooking fires, and lanterns bobbed between the vehicles like fireflies. His heart thundered in his chest. Bella was down there, somewhere among those wagons. Henry drew up beside him, studying the scene with experienced eyes. 8 men, he said quietly, plus the children. Lucas nodded, already dismounting. His legs were stiff from days in the saddle, but determination drove him forward. He removed his gun belt, wrapping it carefully around his saddle horn. "What are you doing?" Henry asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. "Going down there with nothing but faith," Lucas answered. He pulled his Bible from his saddlebag, and tucked it into his coat. The Lord brought me this far. He'll see me through. Henry's expression remained neutral, but respect flickered in his eyes. I'll watch from here. If trouble starts, he left the sentence unfinished. Lucas clasped his friend's arm in gratitude, then began picking his way down the snowy slope. The last light of day caught his tall figure as he approached the camp, making him stand out stark against the white ground. Heads turned at his approach, and men reached for weapons. The railroad foreman emerged from the largest wagon, a tin cup of coffee in his hand. His face hardened when he saw Lucas. This is private property, stranger. Best move along. Lucas stopped at the edge of the firelight, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. I've come for my daughter. A ripple of mutters went through the gathered men. The foreman's lip curled. Don't know what you're talking about? We've got legal papers for all our workers. She's 8 years old, Lucas said, his voice steady but tight with controlled anger. Her name is Bella. She wears a silver locket that belonged to my wife. Papers say different. The foreman took a deliberate sip of coffee. Mrs. Graves sold us fair rights to the girl's labor. She's property, legal, and proper. Lucas felt righteous anger rise in his chest, but kept his voice level. No child is property. He pulled his Bible from his coat, holding it up so the firelight caught its worn leather cover. The Lord Jesus said, "Suffer the little children to come unto me, and forbid them not." Something stirred in one of the smaller wagons. A small face appeared at its canvas opening, hope dawning in familiar eyes. Papa? Bella's voice trembled with disbelief and joy. Before anyone could move, she scrambled down from the wagon and burst into a run, her thin shoes kicking up snow. Papa! The silver locket bounced against her throat, catching the last rays of sunset in a brilliant flash. The sight struck the gathered men silent. Even the foreman lowered his cup, uncertainty crossing his face. Lucas dropped to one knee, arms opening wide. Bella flew into his embrace, her small body shaking with sobs. He held her close, one hand cradling her head, feeling the warmth and life of her after so many days of desperate pursuit. I knew you'd come, she whispered against his coat. I prayed every night. So did I, little one, Lucas murmured. So did I. The foreman cleared his throat. Touching scene, but it don't change the papers. Girls contracted fair and square. A new voice spoke from the darkness. Papers bought with lies have no honor. Henry emerged from the shadows, his quiet presence commanding immediate attention. He stepped into the firelight, standing tall beside Lucas and Bella. The railroad men shifted uneasily, recognizing his cavalry scout's jacket. This man speaks truth, Henry continued, his voice carrying the weight of authority. I knew the child's mother. Knew her Apache name, her people's ways. That locket tells a story these men know nothing about. He fixed the foreman with a steady gaze. Would you stand before a judge and claim right to steal a man's daughter? The gathered workers exchanged glances. One spoke up hesitantly. Boss, if the girl's got real family... The foreman's face worked through several emotions: greed, anger, calculation, and finally resignation. He knew he was losing his audience, and with it, his power over the situation. Ain't worth the trouble, he muttered at last. He waved a dismissive hand. Take her then. But don't expect to see them wages Mrs. Graves got paid. Keep them, Lucas said, rising with Bella still clinging to him. They're stained with sin anyway. Bella's arms tightened around his neck as he turned to leave. The locket pressed between them, no longer a lost treasure but a bridge between past and future, a symbol of faith rewarded and family restored. They walked slowly back to where their horses waited, Henry following a few paces behind. The camp fell away into darkness, taking with it all memory of Bella's captivity. Above them, stars began to pierce the darkening sky, as if heaven itself celebrated their reunion, Lucas helped Bella onto his horse, then mounted behind her. She settled against his chest, small hands gripping the saddle horn. The familiar weight of his Bible pressed against his heart through his coat pocket, reminder of the prayers that had guided him here. "Ready to go home?" he asked softly. Bella nodded, then looked up at him with shining eyes. "Is it far?" "Not so far now," Lucas assured her, "and every step brings us closer." Henry mounted his own horse, and together they turned toward the trail that would lead them back to Lucas's cabin. As they rode into the gathering night, Bella began humming softly, one of her mother's songs, Lucas realized with a catch in his throat. The melody floated on the cold mountain air, weaving together past and present, two cultures, two faiths, into one family restored by love and providence. The silver locket gleamed in the starlight, its journey finally complete. Lucas wrapped his coat more securely around Bella, marveling at how natural it felt to protect her, to cherish her, to be the father she had waited for, and he had never known he needed to become. Behind them, the railroad camp disappeared into darkness, taking with it the last shadows of separation and loss. Ahead lay home, and all the promises of tomorrow. Lucas strode into the sheriff's office, Bella's small hand tucked in his, Henry following close behind. Morning sunlight streamed through dusty windows as they faced Sheriff Rudd and the hastily gathered town council. Reverend Harlan stood from his chair, journal open in weathered hands. Every word Lucas spoke was true. "I recorded Alona's visit myself, years ago. That locket proves the connection beyond doubt." Bella pressed closer to Lucas's leg, her voice clear in the quiet room. "He's my papa. He came for me when nobody else would." Murmurs rippled through the gathered townsfolk. A few scowled at the sight of Henry standing proud in his scout's jacket, but most watched in silence as Sheriff Rudd dipped his pen. "Well then," the sheriff said, scratching his signature across the guardianship papers. "Reckon that settles it, legal and proper." "The Lord's justice is done," Reverend Harlan declared, smiling gently at Bella. Outside, Lucas lifted his daughter onto his horse, her silver locket catching the sun. They rode out together, past silent neighbors and closed doors, but Lucas felt only joy. The proof of their bond shone in Bella's eyes, stronger than any paper could declare. "Let's go home," he said softly, and felt her small hands tighten on the reins in answer. The cabin door creaked open to welcome them home. Lucas quickly set about building a fire, while Bella explored her new world with wide eyes. She traced her fingers along rough-hewn shelves, touched each colorful quilt, and finally discovered the small chair Lucas had carved just for her. "Is this mine?" she whispered, running her hand over the smooth pine seat. "Made it special for you," Lucas replied, his heart warming at her wonder. Bella carefully removed the silver locket from her neck and hung it beside the leather-bound Bible on the shelf. "Now it's where it belongs," she said with quiet certainty. "Right next to God's word like Mama would want." In the days that followed, Lucas worked steadily at carving a pine cradle. Though Bella had long outgrown such things, his hands shaped the wood with purpose, each stroke a promise of new beginnings. That evening, as snow drifted past frosted windows, Bella curled against Lucas's shoulder by the crackling hearth. The lamplight cast a gentle glow, filling corners that had known only shadows. Her soft laughter echoed in spaces that had held only silence. Lucas bowed his head, whispering, "Thank you, Lord, for bringing her home." He knew in his heart that this child was truly God's gift restored. Thanks for tuning in. These stories remind us that life is more than headlines. It's about heartlines. Subscribe if you want more moments that make you pause, feel, and reflect.